You are a worthless mistake of my past. Get out and never come back. Those were the last words my mother screamed at me before slamming the heavy oak door in my face. 18 years later, my head of security radioed me saying, "Ma'am, your parents are at the main gate of your estate, and they look like they have not eaten in days." I smiled and gave an order that shocked everyone. My name is Audrey Stone, and at 34 years old, I am known on Wall Street as the shark who buys bankrupt companies and turns them into gold. But 18 years ago, I was just a terrified pregnant teenager thrown out into a blizzard by the people who were supposed to love me. Before I tell you how I brought my toxic family to their knees, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to succeed just to spite the people who said you would fail. The tires of my Bentley crunched softly against the fresh snow as we pulled up to the driveway of my estate in the Hamptons. It was a brutal winter night. The kind of cold that bites through your skin and settles in your bones. Inside the car, the air was warm and smelled of expensive leather and vanilla, but outside the wind was howling. I looked down at my phone. Another 5 missed calls from an unknown number. I knew exactly who it was. My driver, James, slowed the car as we approached the massive iron gates. The security lights cut through the darkness, revealing 2 figures huddled together against the stone pillar. My head of security voice crackled over the intercom system. "Ms. Stone, I apologize for the delay. We have 2 individuals refusing to leave the premises. They claim to be your parents, but they have no identification, and frankly, they look like vagrants. Should I call the police to remove them?" I pressed the button to lower the tinted window just an inch. The icy wind rushed in, carrying the sound of their desperate pounding on the metal bars. I looked at the security monitor embedded in the console. There they were, Beatrice and Richard Miller. The last time I saw them, Beatrice was wearing a silk gown and holding a glass of champagne while she told me to go die in the street. Now she was wearing a thin, tattered coat that was 2 sizes too big, and Richard was shaking uncontrollably, holding a plastic bag that looked like it contained everything they owned. They looked at the Bentley, not knowing I was inside. They just saw a symbol of wealth they could no longer touch. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. I felt a cold calm wash over me, the same cold I felt the night I lost my baby because of them. James looked at me in the rearview mirror, waiting for my command. Everyone expected me to tell security to chase them away, to protect my peace. But peace was not what I wanted. I wanted justice. I leaned forward and pressed the intercom button. My voice was steady and sharp as a blade. "Do not call the police," I said. "Open the gates. Let them walk up the long driveway in the snow. I want them to see every inch of the paradise they are banned from. I want them to see exactly what a worthless mistake can build." The heavy iron gates began to creak open slowly. Beatrice looked up, her eyes widening with a mixture of fear and greedy hope. She grabbed Richard's arm and they began to stumble forward into the light. They thought they were being saved. They had no idea they were walking straight into the lion's den, and this time I was the one holding the keys. To understand why I opened that gate, you have to understand the night that killed the girl I used to be. It was 18 years ago on a Tuesday night in December. The house looked perfect for the upcoming holiday party, with garlands wrapped around the banisters and the smell of cinnamon in the air. But upstairs in my bedroom, my life was ending. I was 16 years old and 5 months pregnant. I had managed to hide my condition with baggy sweatshirts and layers of clothes, terrified of what would happen if anyone found out. But that night, my mother Beatrice walked into my room without knocking. She was holding the oversized sweater I had just taken off to shower. I stood there in just a tank top, and the secret I had been keeping was exposed. My stomach was visibly rounded. The silence in the room was louder than the winter storm raging outside. I remember looking at her, searching her eyes for a flicker of shock, or maybe even a mother-esque concern. I expected her to ask me what happened. I expected her to ask if I was okay. Instead, I got the back of her hand. The sound of her diamond ring hitting my cheekbone echoed off the walls. The force of the slap sent me crashing to the floor. The mention of the Henderson name only made her eyes turn colder than ice. She grabbed me by the hair and pulled my face close to hers. Her breath smelled of expensive wine and peppermint. "You will never say that name again," she hissed. "You will not drag this family through the mud with your lies just because you could not keep your legs closed. You are a worthless mistake of my past, Audrey. I should have never kept you, and I certainly will not let you destroy my future with this bastard child." She dragged me toward the closet and started throwing my clothes into a pile. "Get up," she commanded. "You are leaving, tonight." I thought she meant I was being sent to a boarding school or a relative's house. I had no idea that she meant I was being erased completely. That night, she chose her political image over her own flesh and blood. And as I lay on the carpet tasting the blood from my cut lip, I realized she had never really been my mother. She was just a woman who owned me, and I had just become a liability she needed to liquidate. I crawled across the Persian rug toward the one person I thought would save me. My father, Richard. He had always been the quiet one, the one who sneaked me extra dessert when Mom was not looking. I grabbed the hem of his trousers, my hands shaking violently. "Dad, please!" I begged, my voice cracking. "You cannot let her do this. It is snowing. I have nowhere to go. Please, Dad, help me." I looked up at him, expecting to see the warm eyes of the man who taught me how to ride a bike. But I did not find my father that night. I found a coward. Richard refused to make eye contact. He looked over my head at the wall as if I were already a ghost. He shifted his weight uncomfortably, clearly terrified of contradicting my mother. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his leather wallet. I felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe he was going to give me a key to a safe house or call a relative to come pick me up. Instead, he pulled out a single crisp $100 bill and crumpled it into my palm. His hand was cold and clammy. "Go, Audrey," he whispered so quietly I almost missed it. "Just go. Do not make your mother any angrier than she already is. Take this and find a motel." That was the price of my safety. That was the value he placed on his daughter and his grandchild. $100. Before I could protest or throw the money back in his face, the housekeeper was instructed to escort me out. I was shoved through the heavy front doors and the lock clicked shut with a finality that echoed in my soul. The wind hit me like a physical blow. I had no coat, just a thin sweater and jeans. I walked down the long driveway, the snow soaking through my sneakers, instantly turning my feet into blocks of ice. The lights of the house, my home for 16 years, faded behind me. I walked toward the main road, fighting against the biting wind. The pain in my stomach grew from a dull ache to a sharp tearing sensation. I tried to curl my arms around my belly, trying to keep the baby warm, but my own body was failing. My vision began to blur. I collapsed near a bus stop, the world spinning violently around me. The last thing I saw was the blinding headlights of a passing truck before everything went black. When I woke up, I was not in heaven. I was in a room with peeling green paint and the strong smell of bleach. It was a charity hospital on the other side of town. A nurse with tired eyes and a kind face was adjusting my IV drip. She looked at me with deep pity. I tried to sit up, but my body felt like lead. I asked about the baby. I needed to know. She just shook her head slowly and placed a hand on my shoulder. "I am so sorry, honey," she said softly. "You came in with severe hypothermia and trauma. There was no heartbeat. We did everything we could." I turned my face to the wall and stared at a water stain on the ceiling. I did not cry. I had no tears left. That night, the frightened teenager named Audrey Miller died in that cold charity ward. And from her ashes, a woman named Audrey Stone was born. A woman who would never rely on anyone again. A woman who would turn her pain into power. The nurse handed me a pamphlet for a women's shelter, and that was my new reality. For the next 5 years, I did not sleep more than 4 hours a night. I worked the graveyard shift at a diner pouring coffee for truckers until my hands shook from exhaustion. By day, I cleaned houses for rich families, scrubbing the same marble floors my mother used to walk on. I saved every penny. I ate instant noodles and read textbooks I found in the trash behind the university library. I did not have a family anymore, so I made money my family. I got my GED with a perfect score. Then came the scholarship to Harvard Business School. I was not there to make friends or join sororities. I was there to learn how to destroy my enemies legally. While other students were partying on weekends, I was analyzing market trends and corporate law. I graduated top of my class, not because I was the smartest, but because I was the hungriest. I had a fire inside me that terrified my professors. Wall Street became my battlefield. I earned a reputation as a shark. They called me the Iron Maiden of mergers and acquisitions. I specialized in distressed assets. If a company was dying, I was the vulture that decided if it lived or died. I changed my last name to Stone. Cold, hard, unbreakable. I buried the weak little girl named Audrey Miller deep in the ground. And then 3 months ago, the alert flashed on my Bloomberg terminal. The Miller Group, my father's company. They were overleveraged and drowning in debt due to bad investments and my mother's lavish campaign spending. The banks were ready to foreclose. It was the moment I had been waiting for half my life. I did not hesitate. I formed a shell company called Stone Holdings. I bought their distressed debt from the bank for pennies on the dollar. I bought the mortgage on the factory. I bought the lien on the family estate in the Hamptons. I bought it all. They thought they were being saved by an anonymous investor. They had no idea they had just sold their souls to the daughter they left for dead in the snow. I now owned the roof over their heads and the food on their table. It was time to introduce myself. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor took exactly 30 seconds, time enough to check my reflection in the polished steel doors. I looked nothing like the girl who once scrubbed toilets to pay for textbooks. My suit was bespoke Italian silk, and my heels clicked against the marble floor like the countdown of a time bomb. I paused outside the heavy mahogany double doors of the boardroom. I did not need to guess what was happening inside, because I had listened to the audio feed from the hidden microphones I planted a week ago. Inside, my parents were currently tearing each other apart. Beatrice was pacing back and forth, her heels digging into the plush carpet. "You are useless, Richard," she screamed. "How could you let the bank freeze our personal accounts? I have a fundraiser tonight. Do you know how it looks when my credit card gets declined at the florist?" Richard was slumped in his leather chair, holding his head in his hands. "It is not just the accounts, Beatrice," he stammered, his voice thick with panic. "They are seizing the assets. The yacht, the summer house, even the cars. We are done. Unless this Stone Holdings group agrees to a buyout, we are going to be on the street by tomorrow morning." I listened to their panic like it was a favorite song. They were not worried about their employees losing jobs. They were not worried about the legacy of the company my grandfather built. They were worried about appearances. Beatrice was worried about her political image, and Richard was worried about losing his country club membership. They were exactly the same people who threw me out into the snow, only now they were the ones freezing. I stood outside the doors, adjusting the cuffs of my blazer. My assistant Sarah, a bright young woman who knew my entire history, looked at me with a mixture of admiration and nervousness. She adjusted her glasses and whispered, "Ma, are you ready?" I nodded once. I had been ready for 18 years. Inside the room, the argument escalated. "I do not care what you have to do," Beatrice yelled. "Sell the factory, raid the pension fund, just get the money. If this Chairman Stone walks in here, you better charm him. Offer him whatever he wants. We need cash, Richard, and we need it now." The irony was suffocating. They were preparing to beg a stranger for mercy. They were preparing to sell off the livelihoods of hundreds of workers just to keep their mansion. They had no idea that the person holding the axe was the same person they threw away like garbage. They were expecting a savior, but they were about to meet their executioner. Sarah pushed the doors open. The heavy wood swung inward, interrupting Beatrice mid-scream. The room fell silent. Dust motes danced in the light, streaming from the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city they thought they owned. Richard stood up, straightening his tie, trying to look like a CEO instead of a bankrupt failure. Beatrice smoothed her skirt instantly, putting on her fake campaign smile, the same one she used on billboards. "Mr. Stone." Richard began, his voice shaking slightly as he looked toward the doorway. "We are so honored that you could join us. We were just discussing the synergy between our firms, and I believe we can come to a very profitable arrangement." Sarah stepped aside, clearing the path for me. She cleared her throat loud enough to cut through the tension. Actually, she said, her voice ringing clear across the long mahogany table. It is Ms. Stone. Chairman Stone is here. I stepped into the frame. The silence that followed was not just quiet. It was the sound of a world ending. I walked into the room, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. My heels sank slightly into the plush carpet, but my stride remained firm. I did not look at them immediately. Instead, I walked straight to the head of the table, the seat that my father had occupied for 30 years. I placed my briefcase down with a deliberate thud that echoed in the silence. The air in the room was thick with the smell of stale coffee and fear. Beatrice was the first to break the silence. She looked me up and down, her eyes glossing over my tailored suit and focusing only on my gender and age. She let out a sharp, annoyed sigh. She did not see a predator. She only saw prey. Finally, she snapped, "You are late. The agency said they were sending a top-tier assistant, not a runway model. Do not just stand there gawking. Pour us some water. My husband is parched and we are waiting for Chairman Stone. If you want to make a good impression, you better learn to be useful and invisible." I paused. A small amusement danced in my chest. 18 years and she had not changed a bit. She still saw people as tools to be used. She still believed she was the queen of a kingdom that had already burned to the ground. I looked at the crystal pitcher of water on the sideboard, then back at her. I did not move. I did not speak. I just stared at her with the intensity that made Richard shift uncomfortably in his seat. "Are you deaf, girl?" Beatrice hissed, slamming her hand on the table. Her face turned a blotchy red. I said, "Pour the water. Do you know who I am? I can have you blacklisted from every agency in this city before lunch." I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that did not reach my eyes. It was the smile of someone who holds a royal flush while their opponent is betting their last dollar on a pair of twos. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick black folder. I tossed it across the long mahogany table. It slid perfectly across the polished wood, stopping just inches from Beatrice's manicured fingers. "Read it," I said, my voice calm but commanding. "That is not a resume. That is the deed to this building, the mortgage on your house in the Hamptons, the liens on the factory machinery, and the promissory notes for every single loan you have defaulted on in the last 6 months." Richard blinked, looking from the folder to me. His hands were trembling as he reached for the documents. "I do not understand," he stammered. "Where is Chairman Stone?" "We were told the chairman of Stone Holdings was coming to negotiate a bailout." I pulled out the heavy leather chair at the head of the table and sat down, crossing my legs. I leaned back and looked my mother dead in the eye. "I am not here to pour water, Beatrice. I am here to decide if you drown. I am Audrey Stone, and I own your lives." Richard stared at me with his mouth slightly open. He was not looking at my face. He was staring at my left hand, which was resting on the leather portfolio. Running across my knuckles was a jagged white scar. It was a souvenir from 18 years ago, when I tried to stop the heavy oak door from slamming shut on me, and the metal latch tore through my skin. It was the mark of my exile. Richard's face went pale, like all the blood had been drained out of him. He looked from the scar to my eyes, and I saw the moment the realization hit him like a physical blow. "Audrey," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Is that really you?" I did not flinch. I kept my expression as still as a frozen lake. "Hello, Father," I said. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I expected Beatrice to scream. I expected her to call security or try to deny it, but I had forgotten who I was dealing with. Beatrice Miller was a political animal. She survived by spinning narratives and twisting reality to suit her needs. She did not panic. She pivoted. Her eyes widened not with fear, but with a calculated performance of joy. She stood up so fast her chair knocked against the wall and rushed around the table. "Audrey," she cried out, throwing her arms wide open. She enveloped me in a suffocating embrace that smelled of expensive perfume and deceit. "My baby girl, you came back. Oh, thank God you finally came back to us. I stood stiffly, my arms at my sides, refusing to return the hug. It felt like being squeezed by a python. Beatrice pulled back, holding my shoulders, and looking at me with tears that appeared on command. She turned to Richard with a beaming smile. Look at her, Richard, she gushed. Look at our daughter. She is a CEO. She is powerful. I knew it. I knew she had it in her. She turned back to me, her grip tightening on my shoulders. Do you see now, Audrey? Do you see why I had to do it? When I sent you away that night, I was heartbroken, but I knew it was the only way. You were soft. You were weak. If I had let you stay, you would have been just another spoiled housewife with no ambition. I had to be the villain so you could become a hero. I pushed you out of the nest so you would be forced to fly. And look at you now. I made you Audrey. I made you strong. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She was rewriting history in real time. She was not the monster who abandoned her pregnant daughter in a blizzard anymore. In her twisted mind, she was the visionary mother who practiced tough love for my own good. It was sickening. I peeled her hands off my shoulders as if they were covered in filth. I took a step back, creating a barrier of cold air between us. You did not make me, Beatrice, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You tried to break me. There is a difference. You threw a child into the snow to die. Do not dare call it parenting. Beatrice did not let the rejection land. She just laughed a nervous tinkling sound and waved her hand dismissively. Oh, you always were so dramatic. Just like your grandmother. But let us not dwell on the past. You are here now. You are successful. And you are the chairman of Stone Holdings. This is perfect. This solves everything. We can keep it all in the family. We do not need to worry about the foreclosure or the loans, right? Since it is all family money now, I am sure we can work out a forgiveness plan. I looked at Richard, who was still trembling, and then back at Beatrice as hopeful, greedy face. She actually thought that 18 years of trauma could be erased because she needed money. You seem to be confused, I said, sitting back down at the head of the table. Family implies people who care about you. Stone Holdings is a business, and business is about to commence. The heavy silence in the room was shattered by the sound of the double doors banging against the wall. Courtney Miller breezed into the boardroom like a hurricane of expensive perfume and entitlement. She was 28 years old, but she still acted like a petulant teenager. She was glued to her phone scrolling through Instagram and did not even look up to see who was sitting at the table. Mom, I need the black Amex, she announced, her voice shrill and demanding. The spa just declined the platinum card, and I have a facial in 20 minutes. Do you want me to look stress-aged for my followers? Beatrice turned pale. She stood up quickly, trying to block Courtney's view of me. Courtney, honey, not now. We are in a very important meeting. Please just wait outside. Courtney rolled her eyes and finally looked up. Her gaze landed on me. She did not recognize her own sister at first. It had been 18 years, and to her, I was just a vague memory of someone who disappeared when she was 10. But she did recognize one thing. Her eyes locked onto the Himalayan Birkin bag resting on the floor next to my chair. It was a bag worth more than a luxury car, and Courtney knew it. It was the holy grail of fashion, and she had been trying to get on the waiting list for years. She pushed past Beatrice and marched right up to me. Who is this? She asked, pointing a manicured finger at my face. And why does the new consultant have a limited edition Hermes bag? Is it fake? It has to be fake. There is no way a corporate nobody can afford that. Richard cleared his throat nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. Courtney, this is Audrey, your sister. Courtney froze. She squinted at me, tilting her head. The realization dawned on her slowly, but there was no warmth in her eyes, only a flash of jealous recognition. Audrey, the runaway. Wow, you look different. She looked me up and down, her eyes filled with a mixture of envy and disdain. She saw the bespoke suit, the diamond studs, and the confidence that radiated off me. Her insecurity triggered her defense mechanism immediately. So this is where you have been. I guess you found a rich old husband to pay for your lifestyle. Or is this how you pay the bills now? High-end escorting. I heard that pays well if you have no morals. Is that how you got the bag, Audrey? By getting on your knees. Beatrice gasped, but she did not defend me. She just looked terrified of my reaction, knowing that I held the fate of their company in my hands. I stood up slowly, towering over Courtney in my heels. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the clinical precision of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. That bag costs $450,000, Courtney. I bought it with the commission I made from a single morning of trading, and unlike you, I do not need a man or a parent to pay for my existence. While you were busy posting filtered selfies and racking up debt, I was building a portfolio that could buy and sell this entire building 3 times over. I took a step closer, invading her personal space. And just so we are clear about the financial reality of this family, that credit card you are screaming for is linked to a bank account that is currently overdrawn by $50,000. The Range Rover you drove here in is 2 payments away from being repossessed. You are standing there wearing a Gucci dress you cannot afford, acting like a princess in a castle that has already been sold. I leaned in and whispered so only she could hear. You are not the golden child anymore, Courtney. You are a liability, and I am the only reason the tow truck is not hooking up your car right now. So I suggest you sit down, shut up, and let the adults try to save you from poverty. Courtney's mouth fell open. Her face turned a deep shade of crimson. She looked at Beatrice for backup, but for the first time in her life, her mother looked away, unable to meet her eyes. The golden child had just been tarnished. I slid the document across the polished mahogany table. It landed right between Richard and Beatrice. This was the moment of truth. The document was thick and bound in leather, but to them it looked like a life raft in the middle of a storm. Here's the deal, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. Stone Holdings will issue an immediate 90-day moratorium on all debt payments. We will halt the foreclosure proceedings on the estate, and we will inject enough capital to cover payroll for the next quarter. You will keep your house. You will keep your country club memberships. And most importantly, Beatrice, you will keep your reputation intact for your upcoming election. Richard let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for an hour. He reached for the pen immediately, his hands shaking with relief. But Beatrice was sharper. She placed her hand over his, stopping him. She looked at me with eyes that were calculating and cold. "And what do you want in return, Audrey?" she asked. "You are not doing this out of the goodness of your heart. People like us do not give away money for free." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. I saw the trap I had laid, and she was walking right into it. "I want control," I answered simply. "For the duration of this 90-day restructuring period, I require 51% of the voting rights on the board. I will have final say on all financial decisions. Once the company is stable and the debt is restructured, the control reverts back to you." Beatrice narrowed her eyes. She leaned in close to Richard and began to whisper. They thought I could not hear them, but I had spent years learning to read lips and body language in high-stakes boardrooms. Plus, their arrogance made them loud. Richard looked worried, but Beatrice was smiling that tight, condescending smile. I knew exactly what she was thinking. She looked at me and saw the teenage girl she had bullied for years. She thought I was desperate for her approval. She thought I was buying my way back into the family. I could practically hear her internal monologue. Let her have the control for 3 months, Beatrice was thinking. She is just a child playing dress-up. We will let her use her own money to save the company, and once the debt is cleared, we will find a loophole to kick her out. We will use her just like we used everyone else. Beatrice turned back to me, her face composed into a mask of maternal pride. Well, that sounds very reasonable, darling. After all, who better to trust with the family legacy than family? We would be honored to have you lead the charge. She took the pen from Richard. She did not even read the fine print. If she had, she would have seen the clause on page 42 that stated if any board member acted against the interest of the primary investor, their shares would be immediately forfeited. She signed her name with a flourish. Beatrice Miller. Then she passed the pen to Richard. He signed quickly, desperate to end the meeting and go have a drink. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the sweetest music I had ever heard. They thought they were signing a partnership. In reality, they had just signed their own death warrants. I took the contract back and checked the signatures. Perfect. Welcome to the team, I said, standing up. My assistant will send over the schedule. I expect full cooperation. As I walked out of the room, leaving them to celebrate their victory, I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. They thought they had just played me. They had no idea that the game had ended the moment the ink touched the paper. The family dinner that night was a masterclass in toxicity disguised as high society dining. We sat around the long table in the formal dining room under the glow of the crystal chandelier. The room was filled with the sound of silver scraping against fine china, but the air was heavy with unspoken tension. I sat across from Courtney and her husband Damon. This was the first time I had really looked at him. Damon King. He was a striking man, tall, with broad shoulders and intelligent eyes that seemed to be constantly scanning the room for threats. But his posture was slumped, as if he was carrying an invisible weight. Courtney treated him less like a husband and more like an indentured servant. She snapped her fingers at him when her wine glass was empty. "Damon, honey," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness that barely masked her contempt. "My glass is empty, and fetch the salt from the kitchen. This soup is bland." Damon did not argue. He did not tell her to get it herself. He simply placed his napkin on the table and stood up. I watched his jaw muscle twitch, a tiny sign of the rage he was suppressing. As he walked toward the kitchen, Beatrice took a sip of her Pinot Noir and let out a soft, cruel laugh. "You know, Courtney, you are so lucky," Beatrice said loud enough for Damon to hear, as he pushed through the swinging doors. Most men would have too much pride to wait on their wives hand and foot. But I suppose when one comes from such a disadvantaged background, one is just grateful to have a seat at the table at all. It must be in his nature to serve. It was a comment so laced with casual racism that it sucked the oxygen out of the room. Richard kept eating his steak, pretending he heard nothing. Courtney just giggled. "He knows his place, Mom," Courtney said, smirking. Besides, without us, he would be back in that cramped apartment in Queens, drawing pictures of buildings he could never afford to build. He is lucky we let him play architect with the pool house renovations. I stopped cutting my steak. I looked at the kitchen door where Damon had disappeared. I remembered seeing his name in the background check my team ran. Damon King graduated magna cum laude from Yale Architecture. He had won awards for sustainable design before he met Courtney. Now he was being reduced to a waiter by a family of vultures who had never built anything in their lives. Damon returned with the salt and the wine. He poured Courtney a glass, his hand steady, but his eyes were dead. He sat back down and stared at his plate. In that moment I saw it. The crack in their fortress. Beatrice and Courtney were so blinded by their own arrogance that they did not see the hatred brewing right under their noses. They thought Damon was a broken pet. But I saw a man who was one push away from burning this whole house down. I took a sip of my water and hid a smile behind the crystal rim. I did not need to destroy them all by myself. I just needed to hand a match to the man who was already soaked in gasoline. Damon King was not their servant. He was my new weapon. I found him standing on the terrace, gripping the stone railing so hard his knuckles were white. The winter air was biting, but Damon did not seem to notice. He was staring out at the dark grounds, probably imagining a world where he was not married to a woman who treated him like an accessory she regretted buying. Inside the house, the sound of Courtney's shrill laughter floated through the glass doors, a reminder of the cage he was living in. I walked up beside him silently. I did not say hello. I just leaned against the railing and looked out at the same darkness. "The cantilever design on the Meridian Center in Chicago was brilliant," I said softly. "Most architects would have used steel columns to support that overhang, but you used a suspension system that made the whole building look like it was floating. It was elegant. It was genius." Damon froze. He turned to look at me slowly, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. He was waiting for the punchline. He was waiting for me to mock him the way his wife and mother-in-law did. "You know about the Meridian Center?" he asked, his voice low and guarded. I turned to face him, letting the light from the house illuminate my face. I do my homework, Damon. I know you graduated top of your class at Yale. I know you won the Pritzker Emerging Architect Award 5 years ago. And I know that for the last 3 years, the only thing you have designed is a pool house for a family that does not even know how to swim. Damon looked away, his jaw tightening. He took a sip of his drink, trying to hide the pain that flashed across his face. Courtney thinks my work is boring, he muttered. She says there is no money in sustainable housing. She wants me to work for her father's firm designing strip malls. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. My father's firm is a sinking ship, Damon. You are a racehorse pulling a milk cart. Watching you pour wine for people who cannot even spell architecture was painful. You are the smartest person in that room, and they treat you like the help. Damon looked at me, searching for an angle. Why are you telling me this, Audrey? What do you want? I moved closer, dropping my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. I am telling you this because I hate wasted potential. Stone Holdings is planning a massive redevelopment project in Manhattan, a $1 billion skyline shifter. We are looking for a lead architect, someone with vision, someone who understands that a building should have a soul. I saw the hunger in his eyes. It was a hunger for respect for creation, for a life that meant something. But I cannot hire a man who lets his wife treat him like a doormat. I continued, my voice hardening slightly. I need a partner, Damon, not a servant. So the question is, are you an architect, or are you just Courtney Miller's husband? I pushed off the railing and walked back toward the glass doors, leaving the question hanging in the cold night air. I did not need an answer right then. I knew I had planted the seed. Tonight he would go to bed next to Courtney, but he would be dreaming of skyscrapers. And soon he would realize that the only way to build them was to burn his current life to the ground. The next morning I found Beatrice pacing the length of the sunroom like a caged tiger. Her campaign manager had just sent over the latest poll numbers, and they were abysmal. She was trailing her opponent by 12 points, and the election was only a month away. She needed a miracle, and in her world, miracles were bought, not earned. When she saw me walk in with my tablet, she stopped pacing and fixed me with a look of desperate entitlement. Audrey, she said, her voice sharp and demanding, I need you to authorize a transfer. We are going to host the annual Children's Hope Gala right here at the estate. I need to remind the voters that I am a philanthropist. I need to show them that the Miller family is the backbone of this community. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and sat down on the white linen sofa. And how much will this reminder cost? I asked, not looking up from my screen. Beatrice waved her hand dismissively, as if she were ordering a sandwich. $1 million. That should cover the catering, the decor, and the donation to the charity. It is a tax write-off for Stone Holdings anyway, so do not look so sour. Consider it an investment in your mother's future. When I am city councilwoman, I can make sure your zoning permits get approved instantly. I almost laughed. She was bribing me with my own money. She wanted me to fund the very platform she would use to preach about family values, while hiding the fact that she destroyed her own. But then I realized she was handing me the perfect weapon. A gala meant press. It meant live streaming. It meant the entire elite society of the Hamptons gathered in one room. It was not a fundraiser, it was a stage. I set my coffee cup down slowly and looked at her. I will do it, I said. Beatrice clapped her hands together, her eyes lighting up with greed. Wonderful. I will send you the vendor list and you can just cut the checks. No! Beatrice, I interrupted, my voice firm. If Stone Holdings is sponsoring this event, we are organizing it. My team will handle the catering, the guest list, the press, and the program. You just need to show up and look pretty. I want this to be the most memorable night of your life. Beatrice hesitated for a split second. She hated giving up control. But she was also lazy, and the thought of having someone else do all the heavy lifting while she took all the credit was too tempting to resist. Fine, she agreed, smoothing her silk robe. Just make sure the lighting is flattering. And I want a 10-minute keynote speech right before the donation presentation. I need to make them cry, Audrey. I need them to see my heart. Oh, they will see your heart, Mother, I thought as I walked out of the room. I will make sure they see every dark, twisted corner of it. I picked up my phone and called my assistant. Start the preparations for the gala I ordered, and get the legal team ready. The night of the party is the night we drop the guillotine." The crash echoed through the marble hallway, sounding like a gunshot. I was in the library reviewing the catering contracts for the gala when I heard it. I did not jump. I simply closed my laptop and walked toward the source of the noise. I found Courtney in the main living room, standing over the shattered remains of a Ming vase that had been in the family for 3 generations. But she did not care about the antique porcelain. Her rage was focused entirely on the glossy magazine lying on the coffee table. It was the latest issue of Forbes, and staring back from the cover was my face. The headline read, "The Shark in Silk: How Audrey Stone Conquered Wall Street." Courtney was shaking her face, twisted into a mask of ugly jealousy. Beatrice was standing next to her, trying to calm her down, but Courtney pushed her away. "How did she get this?" Courtney screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the magazine. "I have been pitching People magazine for 2 years to feature my lifestyle brand, and they ignore me." She walks back into town for 5 minutes, and she gets the cover of Forbes. "Look at this photo, Mom. They made her look like royalty." Beatrice tried to soothe her, stroked her hair like she was a toddler. "It is just a business magazine, darling. Nobody cares about finance. Your followers care about fashion and beauty. You are still the star of this family." Courtney snatched the magazine up and ripped the cover in half. "My friends are texting me, Mom," she shrieked. "They are asking if my sister is a billionaire. They are asking why I am promoting diet tea while my sister is buying skyscrapers. She is making me look like a joke. You said she was just here to pay the bills. You said she was a tool. Well, right now the tool is more famous than the masterpiece." I leaned against the doorframe, watching the tantrum unfold. It was pathetic and satisfying in equal measure. Courtney had spent her entire life believing she was special simply because she existed. She had never worked for anything. Now faced with tangible proof of my success, her fragile ego was shattering faster than the vase. "Do something," Mom, Courtney demanded, throwing the ripped pages onto the floor. "Get her out of here. Or at least make her stop outshining me. This gala is supposed to be about us. About the Miller family. If she shows up looking like that, nobody is going to look at me." Beatrice sighed, looking at the mess on the floor. She saw me standing in the doorway, but she did not reprimand Courtney. Instead, she gave me a look that said, "Fix this." Beatrice turned back to Courtney. "Do not worry, sweetheart," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The gala will be your night. I have a plan. Audrey might have the money, but we control the narrative. By the time the night is over, nobody will be looking at her cover photo. They will be too busy talking about her scandal." I walked away before they could say more. They were plotting my downfall, not realizing they were standing on a trapdoor I had already unlatched. Courtney's jealousy was not just annoying, it was useful. It made her reckless, and a reckless enemy is the easiest kind to destroy. The Emerald Hills Country Club was the beating heart of the local aristocracy. It was where reputations were built and destroyed over cucumber sandwiches and Earl Grey tea. Beatrice had insisted I attend her weekly committee meeting, which was really just an excuse for 5 wealthy women to gossip and judge anyone with a net worth under $10 million. We sat on the terrace overlooking the 18th hole, the sun reflecting off the diamond jewelry that adorned every wrist at the table. Beatrice was in her element. She tapped her spoon against her teacup to gather attention. Her friends Mrs. Vander Woodson and Mrs. Higgins turned their surgically enhanced faces toward us. They looked at me with the same expression one might use when looking at a stray dog that had wandered into a palace. "Ladies, I want to formally introduce you to my daughter, Audrey Beatrice," said her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You remember the stories, the trouble she caused us as a teenager, the running away, the rebellion. Well, we have decided to let bygones be bygones. We have welcomed her back into the fold because family forgives. Even the most broken vessels can be glued back together, right?" Mrs. Vander Woodson sipped her tea and smirked. "You are a saint, Beatrice. Truly. I do not know if I could be so generous if my daughter had humiliated me the way Audrey did." "So Audrey, what have you been doing all these years?" "Beatrice tells us you are working in finance. Is that code for being a bank teller? The table erupted in polite tinkling laughter. Beatrice placed a hand on my arm, squeezing it tightly. Oh, do not tease her. She is trying her best. She is helping us with some administrative work at the company. It is good for her to have some structure. We are just happy she is not on the streets anymore. I sat there calmly scrolling through my phone. I had just received a confirmation email from my legal team. The transfer of funds had cleared 3 minutes ago. I looked up at the women who ran this town. They thought they were the queens of the world because their husbands played golf here every Sunday. They had no idea that the ground beneath their feet had just shifted. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through their laughter like a razor. I am not a bank teller, and I am not doing administrative work. Beatrice glared at me, her eyes warning me to shut up. Audrey, do not be rude. Before she could continue, the club manager, Mr. Henderson, approached our table. He looked nervous. He was holding a bottle of vintage champagne that cost more than Mrs. Higgins' car. Beatrice beamed, thinking it was a complimentary gift for her upcoming campaign. Oh, Mr. Henderson, you shouldn't have, she cooed, reaching for the bottle. Mr. Henderson pulled the bottle back. He did not look at Beatrice. He looked directly at me and bowed slightly. My apologies, Mrs. Miller, he said, his voice shaking. This is for the new owner. The table fell silent. Beatrice froze, her hands suspended in midair. What are you talking about? She snapped. The owner is the corporation. Not anymore, Mr. Henderson replied. The board accepted a hostile takeover bid this morning. The paperwork was finalized 10 minutes ago. He turned to me and placed the champagne on the table. Welcome to Emerald Hills, Ms. Stone. We are at your service. I picked up the glass of champagne and swirled it gently. I looked at Mrs. Vander Woodson, whose jaw was practically on the table. To answer your question, I said, taking a sip. I do work in finance. Specifically, I specialize in acquiring assets that bore me. And frankly, the service at this club has been declining for years. So I bought it. I turned to Beatrice, who was turning a shade of purple I had never seen before. And speaking of service, I am making some changes to the membership policy. We are weeding out the toxic elements. Beatrice, I am afraid your membership is suspended effective immediately. You can finish your tea, but then security will escort you to the parking lot. I smiled at the group of stunned women. Enjoy the view, ladies. It is the last time you will see it from this side of the gate. 2 days before the gala, the atmosphere in the house was electric with tension. Beatrice was in the master suite frantically coordinating her jewelry for the big night. She had opened the wall safe and retrieved the family heirlooms, including the pièce de résistance, a vintage diamond necklace featuring a 10-carat center stone that had belonged to my great-grandmother. She laid it out on the velvet duvet cover, admiring how the light caught the facets. It was worth $500,000 easily, and it was the only asset I had not legally seized yet because it was considered personal property. I was sitting in the corner of the room on a chaise lounge, reviewing the final seating charts on my tablet. I could feel eyes burning a hole in the side of my head. Courtney was leaning against the doorframe watching me. She was not looking at my face. She was looking at my open Hermes bag sitting on the floor next to my feet. Her eyes darted from the necklace on the bed to my bag, and then back to me. The gears in her head were turning, and I could practically hear the rusty machinery grinding. Beatrice clapped her hands together. Oh, I forgot the matching earrings in the guest safe downstairs. Do not touch anything, girls. I will be right back. Beatrice bustled out of the room, her silk robe trailing behind her. This was the moment Courtney had been waiting for. I saw her tensing up like a cat about to pounce. I decided to give her the opening she wanted. I need to take this call, I said, standing up and walking toward the balcony door. It is the caterer. I stepped outside, but I did not close the glass door all the way. I turned my back to the room, pretending to speak into my phone, but I was watching everything through the reflection in the glass pane. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck. Courtney moved quickly but clumsily. She rushed to the bed and snatched up the diamond necklace. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, but with adrenaline. She looked at my back to make sure I was not watching. Then she tiptoed over to my bag. She wrapped the necklace in a tissue from the nightstand and shoved it deep into the side pocket of my Birkin. She smoothed the leather down, trying to make it look undisturbed. I saw her reflection smirk. It was a look of pure malicious triumph. She was not just trying to steal, she was trying to frame me. She imagined the police dragging me out of the house in handcuffs. She imagined the headlines. Billionaire heiress arrested for stealing from her own mother. It was a plan born of desperation and stupidity. She rushed back to the doorframe and leaned against it, trying to look casual just as Beatrice came back into the room holding a jewelry box. "I found them," Beatrice announced. "Now, where is the necklace? I want to see how it looks with these earrings." I turned around slowly, sliding my phone into my pocket. I walked back into the room, my face a mask of calm. Courtney was beaming. She looked like a child on Christmas morning waiting to open a present that she knew was going to destroy me. "Mom," Courtney said, her voice feigned innocence. "Did you put it back in the safe? It is not on the bed." Beatrice looked at the empty spot on the velvet duvet. Her face went pale. "No. I left it right here." The trap was sprung, and Courtney was ready to close the jaws. The silence of the master bedroom was shattered by a scream so piercing it could have broken glass. Beatrice stood by the bed, her hands clutching the empty velvet duvet cover where the diamond necklace had been resting just moments ago. Her face was a mask of sheer panic, but not because of the sentimental value. She was panicking because that necklace was her insurance policy if the election failed. "It is gone," she gasped, her voice rising an octave. "My great-grandmother's necklace. It is gone. Richard, do something. Call the police. Lock the doors. Nobody leaves this house." I stood by the balcony door watching the performance. Courtney did not look surprised. She looked like a predator who had just cornered a wounded animal. She took a step forward, her eyes gleaming with malicious excitement. "You do not need the police, Mom," Courtney said, her voice dripping with venom. "You do not need to lock the doors either. The thief is standing right in front of you." She pointed a long, manicured finger directly at my face. Beatrice turned to look at me, and I saw the shift in her eyes. There was no hesitation, no doubt, no question of whether her billionaire daughter would actually need to steal. There was only relief. She wanted me to be the villain. It justified everything she had done to me. "Audrey," Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Open your bag." I looked at them both, my expression unreadable. I held my Himalayan Birkin closer to my side, feigning defensiveness. "You cannot be serious," I said calmly. "You think I stole your necklace? I could buy a jewelry store right now and not even notice the dent in my bank account. Why would I take your necklace?" "Because you are jealous," Courtney interjected, stepping closer. "You have always been jealous of us. And let us not forget you have a history. Remember when you were 10 and stole that candy bar from the corner store? Once a thief, always a thief. Money does not buy class, Audrey, and it certainly does not change who you are inside." Beatrice marched over to the door and yelled into the hallway. "Maria, Damon, get in here now, immediately." The housekeeper, Maria, ran in looking terrified, wiping her hands on her apron. Damon followed a moment later, looking weary and confused. He looked from his screaming mother-in-law to his wife and then to me. "I want witnesses," Beatrice announced, gesturing dramatically to the room like a ringmaster in a circus of cruelty. "I want everyone to see exactly what kind of person my daughter really is before I hand her over to the police. She thinks she can come into my house and rob me blind just because she has a fancy suit." She turned back to me, holding out her hand, palm up. "Give me the bag, Audrey, or I will have Richard hold you down while I search it myself." I looked at Damon. He looked ashamed to be part of this family. I looked at Maria, who was looking down at the floor. And then I looked at Courtney, who was practically vibrating with anticipation, waiting for the moment the necklace would be pulled from my bag and my life would be ruined. "Fine," I said, slowly lifting the heavy bag. "If you want to humiliate me, Beatrice, go ahead. But remember this moment, because you are going to regret it for the rest of your life." I held the bag out. Beatrice snatched it from my hands with a feral growl and dumped the contents upside down onto the white carpet. The contents of my Himalayan Birkin hit the white plush carpet with a dull thud. A limited edition Mont Blanc fountain pen rolled under the bed. My titanium black card landed face up next to a tube of lipstick and a silk scarf. but there was no diamond necklace. The room went absolutely silent. The only sound was Courtney's ragged breathing. She stared at the pile of my belongings, like she was looking at a ghost. She dropped to her knees and began frantically clawing through the bag, shaking it upside down and ripping open the inner pockets. "It has to be here," she screamed, her voice cracking with panic. "It has to be. I saw it." I stood there with my arms crossed, looking down at her with pity. "You seem very sure about what is inside my bag, Courtney. Almost as if you put something there yourself." Beatrice looked from the empty bag to Courtney and then back to me. Her face was flushing red. She realized the plan had failed, but she did not understand how. She turned her fury on me. "Where is the necklace, Audrey?" she hissed, stepping closer. "If you hid it on your body, I will have you strip-searched right here." I laughed, a low, cold sound that made the housekeeper flinch. "You are looking in the wrong place, Mother. You are so focused on blaming the scapegoat that you forgot to watch the other people in the room." I turned my gaze slowly toward the door where Richard was standing. He had been trying to edge his way out of the room during the commotion. He was wearing his velvet smoking jacket, and he looked like a man who was about to be sick. I had felt Courtney slip the necklace into my bag earlier, and while they were distracted by Beatrice screaming for the housekeeper, I had simply slipped my hand into my bag, retrieved the tissue-wrapped bundle, and dropped it into Richard's wide-open jacket pocket as I walked past him to the balcony. It was a sleight of hand I learned from dealing with crooked bankers. "Dad," I said, my voice dripping with mock concern. "You look a little warm, and your left pocket looks a little heavy. Why do you not show Mom what you have there?" Richard froze. His hand instinctively went to his side. He felt the lump. His eyes went wide with horror. Beatrice barked, her voice sharp as a whip. "What is in your pocket?" He tried to back away, but Damon stepped in front of the door, blocking his exit. Richard's trembling hand reached into his jacket. He pulled out the wad of tissue paper. As he unfolded it, the 10-carat diamond necklace spilled out, catching the light of the chandelier and sparkling with undeniable guilt. Beatrice gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. Courtney stopped digging through my bag and sat back on her heels, stunned into silence. I walked over to Richard and plucked the necklace from his shaking hand. I held it up to the light, examining the stones. "Wow," I said, shaking my head. "I knew the company was in trouble, Dad. But are things really this bad? I mean, stealing from your own wife. Were you going to pawn Mom's necklace to pay off your gambling debts? Or maybe you needed quick cash to buy a gift for that mistress in the city." Richard sputtered, trying to find an excuse, but no words came out. He looked at Beatrice, who was staring at him with pure, murderous rage. The narrative had shifted. I was no longer the thief. I was the witness to their dysfunction. I tossed the necklace onto the bed next to Beatrice. "You really should be more careful with your valuables, Mother. It seems the thieves are closer than you think, and they are not me." I picked up my bag and turned to leave. Damon opened the door for me, a small hint of a smile on his face. I walked out, leaving them in the ruins of their own trap. I was halfway down the grand staircase when I heard the explosion. It was not a literal bomb, but the sound of Courtney's ego detonating. I paused on the landing, my hand gripping the cold marble banister. I could hear every word echoing from the master suite. Courtney was not yelling at her mother or her father. She had found a softer target. She was screaming at Damon. "You just stood there!" she shrieked, her voice vibrating with hysteria. "You stood there and opened the door for her like a chauffeur." "Are you stupid, Damon? Do you not realize she just humiliated us? You were supposed to back me up. You were supposed to say you saw her take it." I imagined Damon standing there, his tall frame hunched over, trying to make himself smaller. I imagined him trying to reason with a hurricane. "Courtney, please," he said, his voice low and tired. "She did not take it. It was in your father's pocket. We all saw it." The sound of a slap rang out. It was sharp and sickeningly loud. It echoed through the hallway, silencing the house. I flinched. I had expected yelling, but physical violence was a line I did not think even Courtney would cross. "You are worthless," she spat. "You are nothing without me. You are just a diversity hire my father took pity on. Do not ever talk back to me again. Now get out of my sight. Go sleep in the guest house. There was a long silence. Then the heavy door of the master suite opened, but it was not Courtney who walked out. It was Damon. He walked out onto the landing and looked down. He saw me standing there. His cheek was bright red where she had struck him, but his eyes were dry. For the first time since I arrived, there was no fear in his gaze. There was no hesitation. The servant was gone. The architect had returned. He did not say a word to me. He did not look back at the room where his wife was still screaming his name. He walked past me down the stairs, his footsteps heavy and final. He walked straight to the front door, opened it, and stepped out into the night without a coat. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. I did not need to ask who it was. The text was short. Meet me at the Blackwood Bar in 20 minutes. I have the files. It is time to burn this house down. I smiled and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Courtney had made a fatal error. She thought breaking a man would make him obedient. She forgot that when you break something, you create sharp edges, and Damon was finally ready to cut her. The Blackwood Bar was a dark cavern of secrets located in the basement of a pre-war building in Tribeca. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear or to trade information that could destroy lives. I found Damon sitting in a booth at the far back. The only light came from a small candle on the table, casting long, dancing shadows across his face. He looked like a man who had walked through a war zone. His tie was loosened, his top button undone, and there was a glass of whiskey sitting untouched in front of him. He did not stand up when I approached. He did not smile. He simply reached into his leather messenger bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slid it across the scarred wooden table. The sound of the paper moving against the wood was the only noise between us. I sat down and picked up the envelope. It felt heavy. I opened the clasp and pulled out a stack of bank statements, emails, and invoices. I turned on the flashlight of my phone and began to read. The first page made my stomach turn. It was a ledger from the Miller Family Foundation, the charity my parents had established 10 years ago, ostensibly to provide medical equipment for children with physical disabilities. It was the crown jewel of their public image, the reason they were invited to every high society event. But the numbers did not add up. I saw transfers of hundreds of thousands of dollars going to a vendor called RM Consulting. I flipped to the next page. Damon had done his job perfectly. He had tracked down the registration of RM Consulting. It was a shell company registered to a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands, and the sole signatory was Richard Miller. I kept reading, my rage building with every line. The money meant for wheelchairs, prosthetics, and physical therapy had been siphoned off systematically. And what was it used for? I saw wire transfers to a luxury car dealership for a limited edition Porsche 911. I saw payments for a penthouse apartment in Soho, and I saw monthly stipends of $10,000 going to a woman named Vanessa who was certainly not a physical therapist. I looked up at Damon. My father is stealing from crippled children to fund his midlife crisis. I whispered the words, tasting like bile. Damon nodded slowly. I designed the new wing for the children's hospital last year, he said, his voice raspy and broken. I met those kids, Audrey. I looked their parents in the eye and promised them that the Miller Foundation would help cover their surgeries. I shook your father's hand when he cut the ribbon, all while he was using that money to buy diamond earrings for his 22-year-old mistress. He took a long drink of his whiskey and slammed the glass down. I found these files on his private server when I was setting up the home network. I was too scared to do anything with them. I thought about Courtney. I thought about loyalty. But after tonight, after seeing how they treated you and how they treated me, I realized that loyalty to monsters makes you a monster too. I put the documents back into the envelope and sealed it. This was not just leverage. This was a nuclear bomb. This was fraud, embezzlement, and moral bankruptcy wrapped in paper. With this, I could send Richard to federal prison for 20 years. You did the right thing, Damon, I said, reaching across the table to cover his hand with mine. You just signed their death warrant, and I am going to be the executioner. Damon looked at me, his eyes burning with a dark resolve. Just promise me one thing, Audrey. When you drop the hammer, make sure they never get up again. I picked up the envelope and stood up. Do not worry, I said. By the time I am done, the name Miller will be a curse word in this town. Go home, Damon. Pack your bags. The war is about to end. The doorbell to my penthouse rang at midnight. I knew it was Beatrice. The doorman had called up saying my mother was in the lobby and she was visibly distressed. I opened the door wearing a silk robe holding a glass of water. Beatrice stood there looking like a tragedy queen in a designer trench coat. She had clearly staged this appearance. Her mascara was slightly smudged, just enough to suggest crying, but not enough to ruin her makeup. Audrey, she gasped, pushing past me into the living room without an invitation. Thank God you are awake. I did not know where else to go. Your father has ruined us. She collapsed onto my white Italian leather sofa and buried her face in her hands. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. I walked over and sat on the armchair opposite her, watching her heave with theatrical sobs. I waited for her to look up. I wanted to see the desperation in her eyes. What happened, Mother? I asked, my voice flat, devoid of the sympathy she was fishing for. She looked up, her eyes glistening with artificial tears. It is Richard. He has made some terrible mistakes. The campaign funds are gone, Audrey. All of it. He gambled it away on bad stocks. If the press finds out before the election, I will be destroyed. I will be arrested. You have to help me. You are the only one who can save this family. I took a sip of water, hiding a smirk behind the glass. She was throwing her husband under the bus to save her own skin. She did not know that I already had the files proving Richard stole the money to buy a Porsche and fund a mistress. She thought I was still in the dark. She thought I was still the naive girl she could manipulate. What do you need? I asked, cutting to the chase. Beatrice leaned forward, grabbing my hands. Her palms were cold and clammy. I need $5 million, just a bridge loan. I have a line of credit approved by the bank, but they need a guarantor. They need someone with verified liquid assets. Someone like you. If you co-sign this loan, I can cover the hole in the campaign account before the audit next week. She squeezed my hands tighter, digging her manicured nails into my skin. Please, Audrey. I know we have had our differences. I know I was hard on you when you were a teenager, but I did it because I saw your potential. I knew you were the strong one. Courtney is weak. Richard is a fool. But you are my daughter. You are a survivor just like me. Do not let your mother go to jail. Do not let them win. I looked at this woman who had once told me I was a worthless mistake. Now she was calling me her daughter. She was attempting to use the maternal bond she had severed 18 years ago as a lifeline. It was disgusting. But it was also the perfect opportunity to lock the door of the trap I had built. I pulled my hands away gently and stood up, walking to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights twinkled below us. I knew that if I simply signed that paper as a guarantor, I would be liable. But I had a different plan. A plan that would strip her of everything. $5 million is a lot of money, Mother, I said, turning back to face her. But I cannot let the Miller name be dragged through the mud. It would be bad for my business reputation. Beatrice stood up, hope flooding her face. So you will do it. You will sign. I looked her dead in the eye. I will help you get the money. But not through a bank loan. I have a better investment vehicle, one that will solve all your problems. Beatrice smiled through her fake tears. Anything, darling. Anything you say. Just save me. She had no idea she had just agreed to walk off a cliff. I walked over to my desk and unlocked the top drawer. Inside was a sleek black folder embossed with a gold crest. It was a prop I kept for specific clients, the ones who were too greedy to ask questions and too desperate to read the fine print. I placed it on the coffee table in front of Beatrice. She looked at it suspiciously, wiping a smudge of mascara from her cheek. I cannot sign a bank loan as a guarantor, Mother, I said, sitting back down. It would create a public record. If the press finds out that the chairman of Stone Holdings is bailing out a local politician, it looks like bribery. It would destroy your campaign faster than Richard S. gambling debts. Beatrice's face fell. She looked like a balloon losing air. Then what am I supposed to do? She wailed. I am ruined. There is another way, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. A better way. I opened the folder. Inside were charts showing exponential growth lines going straight up. This is a shadow fund I manage registered in the Cayman Islands. We use high-frequency trading algorithms to exploit currency fluctuations in emerging markets. It is aggressive, it is risky, but the returns are not 10% per year, they are 200% per week. Beatrice stopped crying instantly. She leaned forward, her eyes scanning the fake numbers. 200%, she repeated. Is that legal? I laughed softly. It is offshore, Beatrice. The laws of physics do not apply there. And here's the best part. This fund is anonymous. Richard never has to know. If you invest $5 million tonight, by Friday, you will have $15 million. You can pay back the campaign funds before the audit starts and keep $10 million for yourself. I watched the gears turning in her head. She was calculating. She was not thinking about saving the family anymore. She was thinking about freedom. Think about it, Mother, I continued, leaning in closer. No more begging Richard for allowance. No more worrying about him spending your money on mistresses. This is your chance for financial independence. This is your war chest. You could be the most powerful woman in the state and you would not owe Richard a dime. The greed in her eyes was like a physical hunger. She licked her dry lips. I want in, she whispered. Do it, Audrey. Make the trade. I nodded slowly. I can authorize the trade. But there is a catch. The fund requires collateral. To access this level of leverage, you need to put up an asset of equal value. Do you have $5 million in cash? Beatrice shook her head frantically. You know I do not. Richard drained the accounts. Then we have to use real estate, I said casually. The estate. It is the only asset left with enough equity. Sign over the deed as temporary collateral. Once the trade clears on Friday and the profit hits your account, we tear up the lien. It is just a formality. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. The estate was her crown jewel. It was her identity. But then she looked at the charts again. She saw the $10 million in profit. She saw a future where she did not need her husband. Where do I sign? She asked. I handed her a gold pen. I did not feel guilt. I felt like a judge handing down a sentence. She was signing away the roof over her head for a pot of gold that did not exist. She scribbled her signature on the line. Done, I said, closing the folder. Congratulations, Mother. You just made the biggest bet of your life. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 1 in the morning. The sound echoed through the silent house like a heavy heartbeat. We were in my father's private study, a room that smelled of old leather and expensive cigars. But Richard was not there. He was upstairs sleeping off a bottle of scotch, oblivious to the fact that his wife was currently selling his sanctuary out from under him. On the antique oak desk lay the single most valuable piece of paper in the Miller family archives, the original deed to the estate. It had been signed by my great-grandfather in 1920. It had survived the Great Depression. It had survived world wars. It had remained the unshakable foundation of the Miller name for a century. But it was not going to survive Beatrice Miller's greed. Beatrice sat in Richard's chair, holding the gold fountain pen. Her hand hovered over the signature line. For a fleeting second, I saw a crack in her armor. This house was her identity. It was the stage where she performed her life as the grand matriarch. It was where she held her garden parties and looked down on the rest of the world. To leverage it was the ultimate gamble. Are you sure this fund is secure, Audrey? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. If we lose the house, Richard will kill me. And the voters. If they find out I am homeless. I leaned against the bookshelf, watching her like a hawk watching a mouse. I did not blink. There is no risk, Mother. I lied smoothly. The algorithm is foolproof. But if you are having second thoughts, we can stop. You can go back to begging Richard for money. You can wait for the bank to seize the house next month when his debts come due. At least then, you can tell everyone it was his fault, not yours. That was the trigger. The mention of relying on Richard made her face harden. She hated him for losing their fortune, but she hated the idea of being powerless even more. She wanted to be the savior. She wanted to be the one holding the purse strings. "No," she whispered. "I am done begging. I am taking what is mine." She pressed the nib of the pen to the paper. The scratching sound was loud in the quiet room. Beatrice Miller. She signed it with a flourish as if she were signing an autograph instead of a death warrant for her marriage. She notarized it with her personal seal, completely bypassing the legal requirement for a witness, because as the power of attorney for the household, she technically had the right. She just chose to exercise that right in the dead of night. She handed the deed to me. Her eyes were bright with the fever of promised riches. "Not a word to your father," she hissed. "He is too small-minded to understand high finance. When the profits come in on Friday, I will tell him I saved the estate myself. I will be the hero." I slid the deed into my briefcase and locked the latch. The click sounded like a prison cell closing. "Your secret is safe with me, Beatrice," I promised. And it was. I would not tell Richard tonight. I would not tell him tomorrow. I would tell him when I evicted him. I walked out of the study with the legacy of the Miller family tucked under my arm, leaving my mother smiling at an empty desk, dreaming of money she would never see. The next morning, I found Courtney lounging by the indoor heated pool. She was wearing a bikini that cost more than most people's cars, and she was busy taking selfies for her 50,000 followers. She did not see me approach until I dropped a thick stack of documents onto the glass table next to her iced latte. She jumped, dropping her phone. "What do you want, Audrey?" she snapped, retrieving her device. "I am working." I smiled. "I am here to help you work, Courtney. Stone Holdings just acquired a majority stake in Lumiere Paris. It is a high-end skincare line. We are rebranding and we need a new face for the global campaign. I convinced the board that it should be you." Courtney froze. Her eyes went wide. Lumiere Paris was huge. It was the kind of brand that put models on billboards in Times Square. It was the validation she had been chasing her entire life. "You want me to be the face of Lumiere?" she asked, her voice trembling with excitement. "Why? You hate me." I sat down opposite her, crossing my legs. "I do not hate you, Courtney. I am a businesswoman, and the data shows that your engagement numbers are high. You are the demographic. Young, rich, and beautiful. It is a 1-year contract. $500,000 up front." Courtney squealed. She grabbed the contract, her greed instantly overriding her suspicion. She flipped through the pages, not reading a single word, just looking for the dollar signs. 500,000, she breathed. "This is it. This is my big break. Where do I sign?" I handed her a gold pen. "Right there on the last page. But Courtney, you should probably read the terms and conditions first. Specifically the morality clause on page 12. It states that as the face of the brand, you must maintain a pristine public image. Any scandals, any negative press, and the contract is void. Plus, you would be liable for a breach of contract fee to cover the marketing losses." Courtney waved her hand dismissively, not even glancing at page 12. "I know what a morality clause is, Audrey. I am an influencer. My image is perfect. I do not get into scandals. I set the trends. Besides, who is going to say anything bad about me? I am a Miller." She flipped to the back page and signed her name with a flourish. "Courtney Miller." She looked up at me with a triumphant smirk, thinking she had just secured her fame and fortune. She thought she was using me to get famous. "Thank you, sister," she said, emphasizing the word with sarcasm. "Finally, someone recognizes my talent." I took the contract back and checked the signature. It was legally binding. Courtney had just agreed that if she damaged the brand's reputation, she would owe Stone Holdings $2 million in damages. She had signed her own financial death warrant. And she had no idea that I had a video on my phone involving her abusing her staff that was about to destroy her pristine image forever. "You are welcome, Courtney," I said, standing up. "Enjoy the pool. You are going to need the relaxation because being famous is going to be very expensive for you." The upload bar on my laptop screen turned green. It was done. While Courtney was upstairs picking out her outfit for the gala, dreaming of her face on billboards, I had just pressed the nuclear button on her career. The file I uploaded to an anonymous burner account was a 40-second clip recorded 2 months ago by a security camera in the pool house. It showed Courtney in her true form. In the video, she was screaming at a young African-American catering staff member because he had accidentally put ice in her wine. She threw the glass at him, shattering it against his chest, and used racial slurs that were so vile they made my skin crawl. It was the ugly racist rot at the core of her soul exposed for the world to see. I leaned back in my chair and watched the view count tick up. 1,000, 10,000, 1 million. It hit Twitter, then TikTok, then the tabloids. The hashtag Cancel Courtney Miller began trending worldwide within 20 minutes. The internet moves fast, but outrage moves faster. Upstairs, the silence was broken by a blood-curdling scream. I walked out into the hallway just as Courtney came running out of her room clutching her phone like it was a grenade. She looked wild. Her hair was half done and her face was pale. "Mom!" She shrieked, tears streaming down her face. "They are hacking me! Everyone is attacking me! Look at the comments! They are calling me a monster! They are threatening to burn down the house!" Beatrice came out of her room looking terrified. She checked her own phone. Her face went gray. "It is not a hack, Courtney," Beatrice whispered. "It is a video." "Oh my God, you actually said those things. You threw a glass at him." Courtney's phone rang. It was her agent. I could hear his screaming voice from where I stood. He did not even let her speak. He fired her on the spot. Then the notifications started flooding in, brand after brand, dropping her. Every sponsorship she had spent years cultivating vanished in 60 seconds. Her follower count was free-falling, losing 10,000 people a minute. Then came the ping of a high-priority email. Courtney looked at it and gasped. It was a legal notice from Lumiere Paris. I walked up the stairs slowly, meeting her terrified gaze. "I think that is the breach of contract notification," I said calmly. Courtney looked at me, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "Why are they suing me?" Page 12. "Courtney," I replied, my voice echoing in the hallway. "The morality clause. You just destroyed the brand's image before the campaign even launched. According to the contract you signed yesterday, you are now liable for the projected marketing costs and damages to the brand reputation. That is a $2 million penalty, payable immediately." Courtney dropped her phone. It hit the floor with a crack. She fell against the wall, sliding down until she was a weeping mess on the carpet. $2 million, she whispered. "I do not have $2 million. I have nothing." I looked down at her. She was not just canceled. She was bankrupt. She was in debt to the sister she had bullied her entire life. And the best part was, she had done it to herself. I stepped over her legs to get to my room. "You better start selling those designer clothes, sister. You are going to need every penny. And maybe save the tears for the judge. He might care. I do not." The next 72 hours inside the Miller estate felt less like party preparations and more like the last days of Rome. The house was vibrating with a manic, terrified energy. Phones were ringing non-stop. Creditors were calling for Richard. Lawyers were calling for Courtney. And the event planners were calling for Beatrice, demanding final payments for the thousands of white orchids she had ordered. Beatrice was operating on pure adrenaline and delusion. She walked through the house with a headset on, barking lies to vendors. "The check is in the mail," she screamed at the caterer while frantically declining a call from the bank. There was a glitch in the wire transfer system. "You will have your money on Monday, just set up the tables." She looked at me with wild, desperate eyes. "Audrey, tell me the fund pays out on Friday. Tell me the money hits the account before the gala starts." I sat at the kitchen island calmly eating a grapefruit while the world burned around them. "The algorithms are processing, Mother," I lied without blinking. "Friday night. Midnight. The returns will be liquid. You just have to hold the line until then." Richard was no help. He had retreated into a bottle of scotch. He wandered the hallways like a ghost, clutching the leather folder that contained the fake financial reports I had given him weeks ago. He did not know Beatrice had signed over the house. He only knew that the FBI had been asking questions at his office, and he was praying that the gala would provide enough social cover to make the investigation go away. He looked at me with bloodshot eyes. "You are sure this gala will fix our image?" he asked, his voice slurred. "The press. They are going to eat us alive because of Courtney. Courtney had not left her room since the video leaked. She had taped garbage bags over her windows because paparazzi drones were hovering outside. She was no longer the arrogant influencer. She was a huddled mass of misery. She cornered me in the hallway on Thursday night, grabbing my arm. "You have to fix this, Audrey," she begged. "You have a PR team at Stone Holdings. Make them bury the story. Make them say it was a deepfake. Please. I cannot go out there on Friday. They will boo me." I pulled my arm away. "The PR team is for employees, Courtney," I said. "You are not an employee. You are a liability. But do not worry, Friday night is not about you. It is about Mom. Just put on a dress smile and try not to throw anything at the waiters." They were all clinging to the gala like it was a life raft. They believed that if they could just pull off this one perfect night, if they could just stand on that stage and look like the benevolent, wealthy family they pretended to be, then everything would magically reset. They thought the money from my fake fund would clear the debts. They thought my influence would clear the scandal. They had no idea that I wasn't building a life raft. I was building a gallows. And on Friday night, under the crystal chandeliers and in front of the entire city, they were going to step onto the trapdoor themselves. Friday night arrived, and the Miller estate had been transformed into a palace of light. It was a spectacle of wealth designed to blind the world to the bankruptcy rotting the foundation. Hundreds of white orchids had been flown in from Ecuador, creating cascading floral arches over the driveway. A string quartet was playing soft classical music near the fountain, which had been filled with floating candles. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets moved silently through the halls, carrying silver trays of champagne and caviar. It was beautiful. It was expensive. And it was all a lie. I walked into the master dressing room, where Beatrice was putting the final touches on her appearance. She stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror, draped in a gown of pure white silk. It was a calculated choice. She looked like a bride or a saint. The white fabric was meant to project innocence, purity, and moral superiority. She wanted the voters and the press to look at her and see a benevolent angel of charity. She adjusted her diamond earrings, the only real jewelry she had left, and smiled at her reflection. She did not see a woman who had sold her home and betrayed her husband. She saw a queen reclaiming her throne. She saw me in the mirror and her smile faltered. I was not wearing white. I had chosen a gown of deep crimson red. It was a structured piece that fit like armor with a sharp neckline and a train that followed me like a river of blood. It was bold. It was dangerous. It was the color of a warning sign. Beatrice turned around, her eyes scanning my outfit with disapproval. "Red, Audrey. Really? It is a bit aggressive, do you not think? We are trying to project harmony and grace tonight. You look like you are going to war." I walked over to the vanity table and picked up a tube of lipstick, applying a matching shade of dark red to my lips. "I am not here to blend in, Mother," I said, my voice calm. "I am here to make a statement. Besides, white stains so easily. Red hides the blood." Beatrice laughed nervously, waving her hand as if to swat away my comment. "You have such a morbid sense of humor. Just make sure you stay in the background when the press arrives. We need the focus to be on me and the donation. Has the fund cleared yet? Is the money in the account?" "It is midnight, Beatrice," I reminded her, checking my watch. "The transfer is scheduled for exactly 12 o'clock. Just in time for your big announcement. Until then, just smile and wave." She took a deep breath, smoothing down her white silk. She looked out the window at the line of limousines beginning to snake up the driveway. The flashbulbs of the paparazzi were already popping by the gates. She was terrified of the questions they would ask about Courtney, but she was confident that money would silence them. She walked out of the room, her head held high, ready to play the role of a lifetime. I watched her go. She looked like a lamb walking eagerly toward the slaughterhouse. I took one last look at myself in the mirror. The woman in red stared back. There was no fear in her eyes. The preparation was over. The stage was set. And tonight, the curtain would fall on the Miller dynasty forever. The noise from the driveway was deafening, a cacophony of shouting photographers and revving engines that filtered through the heavy oak doors of the manor. Inside the side hallway, the atmosphere was suffocating. I found Beatrice cornering Damon near the service entrance. She was practically vibrating with anxiety, her white silk gown rustling aggressively as she jabbed a finger into his chest. "You are not going out there," Beatrice hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Look at you. You look like a waiter who got lost. We have enough bad press with Courtney's scandal. I do not need you dragging down the family image even further. Go to the guest house and stay there until the guests leave. Do not let anyone see you." Damon stood there, his jaw set hard. He was wearing a tuxedo, but his shoulders were slumped, the posture of a man who had been told he was worthless for years. He was about to turn around and obey her just to end the conflict. He was about to retreat into the shadows as he always did. I stepped out of the alcove, my red dress moving like liquid fire around my legs. The click of my heels on the marble floor sounded like gunshots in the tense silence. "He is not going anywhere, Mother," I said, my voice cutting through the air. Beatrice spun around, her eyes widening as she took in my appearance. "Audrey, stay out of this. You do not understand public relations. He is a liability. Courtney's husband, appearing alone while she is in hiding, looks suspicious. It invites questions." I walked right past her and stopped in front of Damon. I reached out and straightened his bow tie, my hands lingering for a moment on the lapels of his jacket. I looked him in the eye and saw the flicker of hope returning the spark I had ignited on the balcony. "He is not a liability," I said, turning to face Beatrice. "He is the only person in this house with any integrity left, and he is not going out there as Courtney's husband. He is going out there as my partner." I offered my arm to Damon. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, looking from the terrifying matriarch in white to the woman in red who had promised him a future. Then he took a deep breath. He squared his shoulders. He grew 2 inches taller in that moment. He took my arm, his grip firm and assured. Beatrice gasped. "You cannot be serious. You are going to walk the red carpet with him. The press will have a field day. They will think you are having an affair." "Let them think what they want," I replied. "By tomorrow morning they will be writing about his genius, not his marriage." I nodded to the doorman. "Open the doors." The heavy wood swung open and the world exploded into light. The flashbulbs were blinding a wall of white strobes that washed out the night. The roar of the crowd surged like a physical wave. "Audrey, over here!" "Audrey, look left!" the photographers screamed. We stepped onto the crimson carpet. I felt Damon tense up beside me, but I squeezed his arm. We walked in lockstep, a united front of defiance. The cameras went wild, capturing the image of the exiled daughter in blood red, and the neglected son-in-law finally stepping into the light. A reporter from the Times thrust a microphone over the velvet rope. "Ms. Stone, who is your escort tonight, is this a statement about your sister?" I stopped and turned to the camera, a perfect practice smile on my lips. I waited for the shutter clicks to slow down just enough for my voice to be heard. "This is Damon King," I announced, my voice ringing out clear and proud. "He is not just my escort. I am thrilled to announce that as of this morning, Mr. King has been appointed as the chief architect for Stone Holdings' upcoming Skyline project. He is the visionary building our future." The reporters gasped. They started shouting questions at Damon, asking about his designs, asking about the project. For the first time in his life, the cameras were not looking past him to find a Miller. They were looking at him. I glanced back at the open doors. Beatrice was standing in the shadows, her face a mask of shock and fury. She had tried to hide him. I had just made him a star. And the night had only just begun. The ballroom of the Miller estate was a sea of black ties and designer gowns. The air smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. At the center of it all, standing on the raised dais under the spotlight, was Beatrice. She tapped the microphone gently, and the murmur of 500 guests died down instantly. She looked radiant in her white silk gown, a beacon of maternal grace. But from where I stood in the shadows, I could see the tightness around her eyes. She was not just giving a speech, she was performing for her life. She checked the diamond watch on her wrist. 11:55. 5 minutes until the imaginary funds were supposed to clear. 5 minutes until she thought she would be safe. Welcome, friends, neighbors, and distinguished guests. Beatrice began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. We gather here tonight, not just to celebrate, but to give. The Miller Family Foundation has always been dedicated to the most vulnerable among us, the children, because a society is judged by how it treats its weakest members. I glanced at Richard standing near the open bar. He was swaying slightly, holding a glass of scotch with a grip that turned his knuckles white. He was the man who had looted the charity to buy sports cars, and now he was nodding along to his wife's sermon on generosity. The hypocrisy was so thick, I could taste it. Beatrice continued to spin her web of lies, painting a picture of a family that was united and philanthropic. She spoke of sacrifice and duty, words that she did not understand but knew how to sell. This year has been challenging for our family. Beatrice continued, her eyes misting over on cue. We have faced storms, we have faced rumors, but the Miller oak does not break. It bends, and it grows stronger. We believe in forgiveness. We believe in second chances, and nothing proves that more than the return of my beloved daughter. She extended a hand toward the darkness where I stood. The spotlight swung around, blinding me for a second before settling on my crimson dress. The crowd gasped softly. The contrast between her bridal white and my blood red was stark. It was the visual representation of the war we were fighting. Audrey, come up here, darling, she cooed into the microphone, her smile tight and predatory. Let everyone see the woman you have become. Let them see that the prodigal daughter has returned home to lead us into the future. Let us show the world what a united Miller family looks like. I did not smile. I did not wave. I walked toward the stage with the slow, deliberate cadence of an executioner climbing the scaffold. The crowd parted for me, their applause polite but tentative. They could feel the tension radiating off the stage. They knew something was wrong, but they could not look away. I ascended the stairs and stood next to her. Up close, I could see the sweat beading on her hairline. Beatrice leaned in to kiss my cheek, whispering so only I could hear. Smile, Audrey. The money better be there. We are live. I pulled back and looked at her. Her eyes were pleading, but her grip on my arm was painful. She thought I was her trophy. She thought I was her savior. I turned to the audience and took the microphone from her hand. The weight of it felt good. I looked out at the sea of faces, the politicians, the bankers, the socialites. They were all waiting for a toast. I was about to give them a funeral. Thank you, Mother, I said, my voice amplified and steady, echoing through the silent hall. You are right. Tonight is all about the truth, and it is time everyone heard it. The microphone was cold steel against my palm. It was the only cold thing in the room. The air was thick with body heat, expensive perfume, and the suffocating weight of expectation. I looked out at the sea of faces. 500 of the city's most powerful people were staring back at me. They were the judges, the jury, and the executioners of high society. They had watched my family for decades, eagerly consuming the gossip and the scandals while sipping our champagne. Now they were waiting for the grand finale. I could feel Beatrice standing just a foot behind me. She was radiating a frantic, nervous energy that was almost palpable. She was smiling, that frozen, practiced smile she reserved for cameras, but I knew she was holding her breath. She was waiting for me to announce the donation. She was waiting for me to say the words that would wash away Richard's embezzlement and Courtney's racism. She was waiting for salvation. I looked down at the front row. Richard was there, swaying slightly on his feet. He looked up at me with glassy eyes. He did not look like a predator anymore. He looked like a man who had already drowned and just did not know it yet. Next to him sat the mayor and the police commissioner. They were clapping politely, oblivious to the fact that they were sitting next to a criminal. The silence stretched out. It was heavy. It was absolute. In that quiet, I could hear the hum of the speakers and the distant clink of a glass being set down on a tray. I let the silence hang there. I let it become uncomfortable. I wanted them to feel the tension. I wanted them to lean in. Beatrice shifted her weight. She cleared her throat, a subtle signal for me to get on with it. She thought I was freezing up. She thought I was overwhelmed by the moment. She had no idea that I was savoring it. This was the moment I had dreamed of in that cold boarding school dormitory 18 years ago. This was the moment I had worked for while pulling 18-hour shifts on the trading floor. I looked up at the balcony. Damon was standing there in the shadows watching me. He gave a barely perceptible nod. It was the signal. The files had been sent. The authorities had been notified. The trap was sprung. I turned my gaze back to the crowd. I saw the envy in the women's eyes as they looked at my red dress. I saw the calculation in the men's eyes as they assessed my value. They saw a billionaire heiress. They saw a powerful ally. Tonight I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the room like a knife. My mother speaks of legacy. She speaks of family. She speaks of truth. And I agree. The truth is a powerful thing. It can build empires and it can destroy them. And tonight, I am not here to donate $1 million to a charity that does not exist. I am here to return something that was stolen. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Beatrice gasped behind me. I did not turn around. I kept my eyes locked on the camera at the back of the room. The red light was blinking. The world was watching. And I was about to give them a show they would never forget. The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Beatrice was standing close enough that I could smell her fear masked by Chanel No. 5. She was waiting for the check. She was waiting for me to validate her lies. Instead, I turned slightly and looked up at the massive projection screen behind us. It was currently displaying the logo of the Miller Family Foundation, a golden tree with deep roots. I hope you all enjoy cinema, I said, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. Because before we discuss the future, I think it is important to revisit the past. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers. It was a sharp, deliberate sound. Immediately, the golden tree vanished. The screen flickered to black for a heartbeat, and then a grainy timestamp appeared in the corner. November 14th, 2005. The image that resolved was low resolution, but unmistakably clear. It was the kitchen of this very house. The camera angle was high-mounted in the corner of the ceiling, a security feed that Richard had installed years ago to monitor the staff, but had forgotten to delete. The audience gasped. On the screen, a younger Beatrice was standing over a 16-year-old girl. Me. I was huddled in the corner wearing an oversized sweater, trying to make myself invisible, but there was no hiding from her. The audio crackled through the high-end sound system. It was not the polished voice of the philanthropist standing next to me. It was the shrill screech of the abuser. "You are useless," Beatrice screamed on the screen. "I wish I had never given birth to you. You are a stain on this family." Then came the violence. On the screen, Beatrice raised her hand and struck the teenage girl across the face with such force that she fell to the floor. The sound of the slap was amplified by the ballroom speakers. It was a wet, visceral crack that made every person in the room flinch. Beatrice let out a strangled cry. She lunged for the podium, trying to cover the projector, trying to stop the truth from bleeding out. "Turn it off," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is fake. It is a deep fake. Stop it right now." But the video continued. It showed her kicking the girl on the ground. It showed her spitting on her own daughter. I did not move. I stood like a statue in my red dress, watching the horror reflect in the eyes of the crowd. The socialites covered their mouths. The mayor looked away. The illusion of the perfect Miller family had not just cracked, it had shattered into 1,000,000 jagged pieces. I gripped the microphone tighter and leaned in. My voice was low, dangerous, and colder than the grave. "You remember that night, don't you, Mother?" I asked. "You told me I was broken. You told me I was a worthless mistake that would never amount to anything." Beatrice turned to look at me. Her face pale as a sheet, her eyes wide with terror. She realized in that moment that I was not there to save her. I was the karma she had been running from for 18 years. I stared right into her soul and delivered the final blow. You called me a worthless mistake. Well, mother, look at me now. Today that mistake has returned, and I am going to swallow you whole. Beatrice was still screaming at the projection booth, her voice a shrill instrument of panic that cut through the stunned silence of the ballroom. She turned to the security guards, her face twisted with entitlement. Throw her out. Throw this ungrateful wretch out of my house immediately. She is trespassing. I watched the guards hesitate. They looked from the furious matriarch in white to the calm billionaire in red. They knew where the power truly lay. I tapped the microphone again, drawing the room's attention back to me. Actually, Mother, I said, my voice cool and pleasant. That brings me to my second announcement. You keep calling this your house, but I think you are confused about the nature of property law. I reached into the hidden pocket of my dress and pulled out a folded document. I held it up to the light. The gold seal of the notary glinted under the chandelier. 3 days ago, in a desperate attempt to cover up your husband's gambling debts, you signed a collateral agreement for a high-risk investment fund. You thought you were getting $15 million in illegal offshore profits. What you actually signed was an immediate transfer of deed. Beatrice froze. Her eyes locked onto the paper in my hand. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax statue. You tricked me, she whispered, the microphone catching her breathless horror. I did not trick you, I replied. I simply gave you a rope and you used it to hang yourself. As of midnight tonight, which was 2 minutes ago, Stone Holdings is the sole legal owner of the Miller estate. You are not the hostess anymore, Beatrice. You are a squatter. And I am giving you exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises before I have security remove you for trespassing. The crowd erupted. The murmur turned into a roar of shock and gossip. But I was not done. I turned my gaze to the front row where Richard was trying to edge toward the exit. He had seen the ship sinking and like a rat he was trying to scurry away. Going somewhere, Richard, I called out. He stopped. He turned slowly, his face glistening with sweat. You cannot do this, Audrey, he stammered, his voice shaking. We are your family. Family does not steal from crippled children, I shot back. I signaled the projection booth one last time. The video of the abuse vanished, replaced by a series of spreadsheets and bank records. They were massive, blown up so every person in the room could see the numbers. The Miller Family Foundation, I read aloud, pointing to the screen. A beacon of hope, or so you claimed. But these records show that over the last 5 years, $3 million was siphoned from the charity accounts. It did not go to hospitals. It went to a shell company in the Caymans owned by Richard Miller. It bought a Porsche. It bought a penthouse. It bought diamond jewelry for a woman who is not your wife. Richard looked like he was about to vomit. The guests recoiled from him as if he were contagious. The disgust in the room was palpable. I stepped back from the podium and looked toward the double doors at the back of the hall. I believe the authorities have seen enough, I said. The doors burst open. 6 federal agents in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI marched into the room. They moved with military precision, parting the sea of tuxedos and gowns. The lead agent walked straight up to Richard, who was now trembling so violently he could barely stand. Richard Miller, the agent boomed, his voice authoritative. You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Put your hands behind your back. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. Richard began to sob, begging Beatrice to help him, but she was too busy staring at the deed in my hand, realizing she had lost everything. I stood on the stage watching my father being dragged away in chains, and my mother standing in the ruins of her life. The vengeance was complete. The house was mine. The company was mine. And the family that had tried to break me was finally broken. The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. The polite murmurs of the elite were replaced by a roar of shock and the frantic clicking of camera shutters. Richard was halfway to the door, flanked by federal agents, his head hanging low. He looked small and pathetic, a man stripped of his arrogance and his freedom in a single stroke. He tried to look at his friends, the people he had played golf with for 20 years, but they all turned their backs. They were already distancing themselves, treating him like a contagion they needed to survive. Beatrice stood frozen on the stage for a moment longer, her eyes darting between her husband in handcuffs and the deed in my hand. Then the reality finally pierced through her delusion. The house was gone. The money was gone. Her reputation was incinerated. The only thing left was the daughter she had tormented, and the red dress that mocked her defeat. Something inside her snapped. It was a visible break. Her face contorted, losing all semblance of the poised socialite. Her lips curled back in a feral snarl. She did not scream at the police. She did not scream at Richard. She turned her entire being toward me. "You witch!" she shrieked, the sound tearing through the microphone she had knocked over. "You ungrateful little witch! I gave you life. I made you, and this is how you repay me, by stealing my home." She lunged. She abandoned all dignity, kicking off her heels and charging across the few feet of stage that separated us. Her hands were clawed into talons reaching for my throat. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to erase the smirk from my face and the victory from my eyes. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply watched her come. Two massive security guards in black suits stepped out from the shadows behind me. They moved with the speed and precision of machines. Before Beatrice could even touch the hem of my gown, they intercepted her. One grabbed her left arm, the other her right. They halted her momentum, instantly jerking her back. Beatrice thrashed against them, kicking and screaming like a wild animal caught in a trap. Her white silk dress ripped at the shoulder, exposing her skin. Her carefully coiffed hair came undone, falling in messy strands across her face. "Let me go!" she screamed, spitting at the guards. "Do you know who I am? I am Beatrice Miller. This is my house. I command you to let me go. I will kill her. I will kill her with my own hands." The crowd was no longer just watching. They were participating. 500 smartphones were held high in the air, forming a sea of glowing screens. Flashlights blinded us. The guests were live streaming the meltdown. Every scream, every curse word, every pathetic struggle was being broadcast to millions of people instantly. The comments were scrolling faster than the eye could read. The internet was eating her alive. I stepped forward slowly, stopping just out of her reach. I looked down at her struggling form. She looked up at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. "You are not Beatrice Miller, the owner of this estate," I said, my voice calm enough to be heard over her shrieks. "You are Beatrice Miller, the trespasser, and you are making a scene." I looked at the head of security. "Get them out," I ordered, pointing to the exit. "All of them. The show is over." The guards began to drag her backward. Her heels dragged across the polished floor, leaving scuff marks on the wood she used to prize above her own children. She continued to scream, cursing my name until the heavy oak doors swallowed her voice, and the night took her away. I stood alone on the stage, in the center of the spotlight. The room was silent again, save for the whispers of the guests who were now looking at me with a mixture of fear and awe. I smoothed the fabric of my red dress and turned to walk away. The cleanup was finished. The slate was wiped clean. The morning sun hit the pavement outside the St. Regis Hotel like a spotlight searching for a fugitive. I stood under the awning wearing yesterday's clothes, my face hidden behind oversized sunglasses. The hotel manager had just politely but firmly asked me to leave because my credit card had been declined for the third time. I was waiting for the valet to bring around my Range Rover. It was the last thing I had, the last symbol that I was still Courtney Miller, the Golden Girl. But the car did not come. Instead, a tow truck backed into the circular driveway with a screech of brakes. I watched in horror as a man in a greasy jumpsuit hopped out and hooked a chain to the bumper of my white SUV. I ran forward, my heels clicking frantically on the concrete. "Stop!" I screamed, waving my purse at him. "What are you doing? That is my car. You cannot take it. Do you know who I am?" The man did not even look up. He just spat on the ground and yanked the lever. "I know exactly who you are, lady. You are the girl from the racist video, and this car belongs to the bank now. Your lease is in default." He hauled the car up onto the flatbed. I watched it rise into the air like a casket being lifted from a grave. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was not a text from a friend. It was another email from a law firm. Lumiere Paris was filing for immediate damages. A sportswear brand I had partnered with was suing for defamation. I was being buried under a mountain of litigation, and I did not even have a car to drive away from it. Then I saw him. Damon was walking out of the hotel lobby. He looked different. He was wearing a sharp navy suit I had never seen before, and carrying a leather portfolio. He did not look like the beaten-down husband I had ordered around for 3 years. He looked like a man who owned the world. Damon. I cried out, rushing toward him. Thank God. You have to help me. The bank took the car. The hotel kicked me out. Call Audrey. Tell her to stop this. Tell her I am sorry. Just fix it, Damon. You always fix it. I grabbed his arm, expecting him to flinch, expecting him to apologize and open his wallet, but he stood as still as a statue. He looked down at my hand on his sleeve with a look of mild distaste. He slowly peeled my fingers off him one by one. He reached into his jacket pocket. He did not pull out a checkbook. He pulled out a white envelope. I am not fixing anything, Courtney, he said, his voice calm and deep. And I am certainly not calling Audrey. She is my boss now, and she pays me enough to respect myself. He pressed the envelope into my hand. It felt light, but it carried the weight of a guillotine blade. What is this? I whispered, my hands trembling. It is a divorce petition, Damon replied. I filed it this morning. Irreconcilable differences. And since you signed that prenup to protect your family money, you get exactly what you brought into the marriage. Nothing. I stared at him. I could not breathe. But Damon, I stammered. I need you. Who is going to carry my bags? Who is going to drive me? Damon laughed. It was a dry, short sound. That is the problem, Courtney. You never wanted a husband. You wanted a slave. Well, I am resigning from the position. He walked past me toward a waiting black sedan. The driver opened the door for him. Damon got in without looking back. As the car pulled away, leaving me standing on the curb with nothing but a stack of legal papers and a ruined reputation, I realized the terrifying truth. The servant had become the master, and the queen was just a beggar in designer shoes. The morning sun rose over the Miller estate, washing the white stone facade in a pale gold light. For the first time in a century, the house was completely silent. The screaming had stopped. The police sirens had faded. The paparazzi had moved on to the next scandal. I stood in the center of the grand foyer. The marble floors where Beatrice used to stand and judge the world were now bare. The portraits of my ancestors scowling down from the walls had been taken down, leaving only square outlines of dust on the velvet wallpaper. The house was not a home anymore. It was just a shell, a hollow monument to a dynasty that had cannibalized itself. I walked to the heavy oak front doors and pushed them open. The morning air was crisp and clean, free of the scent of stale perfume and deception. A white van was idling in the driveway. It was not a luxury vehicle. It was rusted around the wheel wells and had a logo painted on the side that read, "New Beginnings Shelter for Women and Children." A woman stepped out of the van. She looked tired, her clothes worn, but her eyes were kind. She looked at the massive mansion with a mixture of awe and disbelief. She was the director of the only shelter in the city that accepted single mothers with no questions asked. A shelter my mother had refused to donate to for 20 years because she said it attracted the wrong element. I walked down the steps, the brass keys to the estate heavy in my palm. "Are you sure about this?" Ms. Stone, the woman asked, looking from the keys to the mansion. "This property is worth $50 million. You could sell it. You could turn it into a hotel, giving it to us. It is too much." I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in weeks. "It is not too much," I said, placing the keys into her rough hand. "This house has been cold for too long. It needs noise. It needs life. Fill the ballroom with tricycles. Turn the master suite into a nursery. Let children run down these hallways without being afraid. Make this place a sanctuary for mothers who actually love their children." I closed her fingers around the metal. "Do not thank me. Just make sure the ghosts of this family never find a place to rest here again." I walked past her and down the long driveway. I did not look back. I did not need to see the house one last time. I knew what I was leaving behind. Beatrice was in a holding cell screaming for a lawyer who would not come. Richard was facing a judge who would not be bribed. Courtney was learning the hard way that influence is not a currency. They were the past. I took a cab into the city. I met Damon at a small coffee shop in the financial district. He was sitting at a corner table bathed in sunlight. He was not wearing a tuxedo or a Servant S uniform. He was wearing a casual button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Spread out before him were blueprints, real blueprints. He looked up as I approached. His eyes were clear and focused. The haunted look was gone, replaced by the intense energy of a creator. "The zoning permits just came through," he said, tapping the paper. "We can break ground on the Skyline project next week. I made some changes to the atrium. I want more light. I want it to be transparent. No dark corners." I sat down opposite him. The waiter placed 2 black coffees on the table. "Transparent is good," I said, looking at the design. "It is strong." Damon picked up his cup and held it out. "To new foundations," he said softly. I clinked my cup against his. The sound was a gentle bell in the morning air. "To new foundations," I repeated. We drank the coffee. It was hot and bitter, and it tasted like freedom. The war was over. The monsters were gone. And for the first time in my life, the future was a blank page waiting to be written. The saga of the Miller family teaches us a brutal but necessary truth. Toxic people will drown you if you let them, even if they share your blood. Beatrice and Richard believed that their status gave them immunity from morality. They hid behind the facade of a perfect family, while rotting from the inside out, assuming that money could patch over the cracks of abuse and neglect. But as Audrey proved, a legacy built on lies is just a castle made of sand, waiting for the tide to come in. The most powerful weapon Audrey possessed was not her money or her Himalayan Birkin, it was her competence. She spent 18 years building a fortress of skills and financial literacy while her family focused on appearances. This story is a testament to the fact that financial independence is the only true freedom. When you control your own resources, you control your destiny. You do not have to tolerate abuse, you do not have to bow to manipulation, and you certainly do not have to save people who are determined to destroy you. We also learn that silence is often louder than screaming. While Courtney and Beatrice used noise and tantrums to assert dominance, Audrey used strategy and patience. She let them dig their own graves with their greed and arrogance. In the end, dignity is not something you inherit, it is something you earn. The Millers lost everything because they valued the image of wealth over the substance of character. True success is sleeping soundly at night, knowing you built your life with your own hands, not by stepping on others. Drop a in the comments if you believe in working in silence and letting your success make the noise. In the comments if